Welcome to Startup Health TV. I'm your host, Logan Plaster. A few years ago, you couldn't swing a stick at a medical conference without hitting a company that was marketing the use of blockchain. For some, it was just that, marketing. But for others, they were really building a future where the distributed networks and verified transactions of blockchain could make health more secure, more efficient for everyone. One of those companies was Patientory. Today on the show, I'll be talking to Chrissa McFarlane, the CEO and founder of Patientory, a startup that joined Startup Health in 2016. Patientory was one of the first movers in this sector and raised more than $7 million in one of healthcare's first ICOs, or initial coin offerings. In our conversation, Chrissa and I will talk about how Patientory survived the hype cycle of blockchain, their current app offering, and why it's more important than ever for patients to own their own health data. Hope you enjoy. All right, Chrissa McFarlane, CEO and founder of Patientory. Thank you so much for taking a few minutes with me for this show.
Absolutely, Logan. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to hear more about what you're working on at Patientory, partially because we haven't really spoken in depth about this for a while. And I know that the company has evolved and this field is evolving. And I can remember an early explanation of what you're working on. So excited to see how it's evolving. If I understand it correctly, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, you're using blockchain technology to empower patients and doctors with secure patient data to access data securely, and then also find actionable insights out of that data. Is that a good explanation?
Correct. That is correct. And we've refined that messaging, so you hit it right, the nail right on the head. Yeah, I think it's been a couple years since we actually touched base on what we were doing when we were, out the gate with our pitch and our raise and using blockchain. One of the, I think, first healthcare companies in the U.S. to actually, incorporate the technology.
That's right. That's right. You were leading the charge, and I want to say maybe 2 years ago at JP Morgan, or just in the ecosystem, blockchain for health was very new, very exciting. You were on the cusp of it. Maybe a place to start here is, how has that landscape evolved in the last 2 to 3 years?
Yeah, I think, back 2 years ago, we were definitely in that hype cycle. I think, a lot of people were tooting around the term, saying they were using blockchain because it sounded good, right? It was the new thing on the block. I think then, especially with the boost in like the ICOs and the token sales that came with it, and all this, available funding, we kind of hit the trough of disillusionment, if you want to look at it from, the hype cycle there.
When did that happen? If you were just to map out the trough of disillusionment.
Yeah, so 2018, we're here. Like, we're way up there. We're in the skies with blockchain, right? I think late, at the end of 2018, going into 2019, we started to see, even in the crypto space, what they call the crypto winter and the blockchain winter, where a lot of companies, who thought they came up with a good use case, but couldn't really develop on it, or didn't really have a meaningful place, or the way they marketed it in the marketplace didn't resonate as much. But we kind of, early 2019, the low bottom of that peak. But something that really good, that happened was, we started to see a lot more of the bigger enterprises start to look at the technology and, start to do POCs. Out of that came the Forbes 50 organizations, the large, which basically is a list of 50 global organizations with, more than 100 million revenue that started to adopt the technology. In healthcare, we started to see more awareness building around it. So myself being a part of HIMSS, et cetera, sitting on the interoperability committee, we started to see a lot more of the C-suite execs want to discover and look at the different use cases using the technology. But specifically for Patientory, during this, I would say we actually were able to overcome a lot of the regulatory hurdles and the development that came with it. So we, at the end of 2019, during that cycle, we launched what we would say our blockchain health information exchange and storage system, which is the PTOI matrix. And
break that down. PTOI matrix, Patientory, obviously, so you've branded your own coin offering. Tell me, kind of break this down for me.
Yeah, so we branded our own, I would say, blockchain network, our inherent blockchain network that is specific and proprietary to what our company develops. It's actually governed within an association model as it relates to a lot of the HIPAA and GDPR compliance and accessing data. I know we've gotten a lot of questions. So why isn't it in Patientory Inc? Like we didn't want to be that central authority over that information and to comply with a lot of these regulations. So that network sits within a 501c organization. It incorporates blockchain, but we're using a lot of the interoperability standards that have existed for the past decade or so, HL7 and FHIR, to access patient medical.
So is the modern incarnation of Patientory more about integration in general with FHIR, and blockchain is a supporting element, or would you say that distributed network sort of blockchain model is integral to what you're doing now?
Yeah, it's absolutely integral. So blockchain is more the function and tool that sits within that decentralization and replication that exists within the network, using the distributed ledger or the blockchain as the feature to provide consent mechanism identification for data. A good thing about that too is it's an infrastructure that we now have 4 other companies that are building different specific healthcare use cases. One is a medical device, so they see the need for that interoperability there to plug into that network as well, which will provide a lot of the patient access mechanisms needed through that decentralization process.
Can you give me a case study? I feel like oftentimes with these integration products and blockchain products, it helps to kind of walk through an actual case study, whether it's a physician accessing data securely, or like you just said, a medical device company. What would be a good case study through which we could understand kind of the most current product?
Yeah, I think looking at the Patientory Inc. products, our 2 products, our company and the products we've built integrated on this network, this infrastructure network, focuses more around population health management and analytics. So that's where we get those actionable insights. So we have 2 products, one specific for consumers and one for enterprises. The consumer side is essentially an app, a consumer app where the Patientory consumer app, where essentially now they're able to start to collect a longitudinal health record of their data, but we supplement that with a user interface, which we're not only collecting EMR data, but we just published a international research study, which talks about the incentivization of behavior changes, where we're collecting, using social and economic terms of health, where we're collecting medical device data as well as wearable device data to really curate that 360 holistic view of the individual. But with that, we're able to find more or less deeper understanding of their health and be able to recommend from the data that we've collected via this infrastructure, this PTOI matrix, recommend basically actions that they can do on a daily basis so that they're maximizing their health. So I think that's one that would be the main use case for the consumer.
So if I'm a patient, I download the app, your consumer facing app, and I want to put together all my data into actionable ways. So part of this is I'm pulling data from my electronic health record from out there in the world, right? And
Yeah,
I'm securely accessing it for my own personal use.
exactly.
How are you able to do that? Like right now it's locked up in Epic, it's locked up in McKesson, whatever it is, and I don't have actionable data. So how do you bridge that gap?
That's where the blockchain comes in. So with the use of the HL7 and FHIR standards, we're integrating that with our decentralization mechanisms and
Hmm.
smart contracts to pull that data, which is at rest in these systems, um, but replicated across the network of nodes, a hospital being a node or a storage center being a node, but it's not essentially centralized because now it's decentralized and broken apart. So you as an individual will find that data using your medical record number, MRN, or security, and create an identification on our blockchain. You'll receive I don't know if you play around with crypto wallets at all. You have a unique identifier on the blockchain network, which then assigns to your health data, which exists in the storage system, which allows you to do it. But I think the biggest difference that we see a lot in the space with companies that are trying to access data is really giving that custodianship to you, the individual, so you can actually share it,
Yeah.
with other people.
What I feel like I hear you saying is you're creating like a secure home for all of this data, whether it's my electronic health records, it's medical device data, it's my own inputted data about my behaviors. There is this secure place. And once you have that, then you can start to analyze, give actionable feedback, behavioral health nudges, all of these other things that start to get very integrated into your life.
Yeah, exactly.
You mentioned that the tide is shifting in the industry, more interest in blockchain, more understanding. How has that turned into, I don't know, partnerships for you or just other success in the market?
Yeah, other than, we have recent partnerships. We currently have like 10 partners now. So the partnership model for us has been really successful. Some of them are already revenue generated for our company. One being with whether that's an integrator play, such as One of Health Redox, that's part of the network that supports the P2A matrix. We also have one recently with TrialScope that enabled to broker a partnership with Moderna. So
Okay.
we just wrapped up through the app, just outreach for patient recruitment for the COVID-19 mRNA vaccine trials.
Wow.
So that was pretty excited. We've, since April, we've pivoted to really, hone in on how the solution can tackle COVID-19
Yeah.
and the pandemic.
I understand the application that we've just talked about, the case study of an individual wanting to access their records securely. But how do you
Okay.
see the same system helping in the search for a COVID-19 vaccine, or just in that general community?
So it's more from a secure data management perspective. You know, Historically, pharma companies, clinical trials have had a hard time in the management of patient data and actually being able to recruit patients effectively
Mm.
for studies. They also don't have access to any medical information. So that has been a lot of the barriers to successful clinical trials.
Mm.
By patients owning that information directly, and having a work or ecosystem at hand to essentially recruit those patients makes it decreases those barriers to entry to actual recruitment and finding eligible participants for clinical trials. In terms of COVID and the pandemic, where blockchain comes in, again, the secure custodianship of that data. We've also plugged in, contact tracing into the network as well, as we've seen globally. It's something about recently too. A lot of the contact tracing apps that are out there have little to no utilization from the public.
Mm.
There's been a lot of, just discrepancies around the security and the privacy of it, right? So, we see where, this type of technology can help at scale, while securing the integrity of a person's information.
How are you using a blockchain infrastructure for contact tracing? I mean, is there geolocating involved in it? Is it like knowing who I've spent time close to, or is it
Yeah.
simply a database?
Yeah, no, that's part of it. So it's integrated in Bluetooth. But again, with our for use case, the use of our consumer app being tied and built on this type of infrastructure, it provides that anonymization and security and privacy to, even though it's on our phones, you will be able to know if you've come in contact with someone, or that can be reported to a public health agency without knowing, identity of the person, at the time. So there are a lot of benefits there when looking at a network and a decentralized network infrastructure at that
You
level.
mentioned people owning their own data and owning their node, that their place in the blockchain. Does that mean that when you then work with pharmaceutical companies like Moderna, that individuals could now or in the future could benefit from that, could even profit from that, owning their own data?
Yeah, I know when we first launched with through Trial Scope, I know a number of companies are also partnered with clinical rheumatoid arthritis as a clinical trial. And patients were actually incentivized, for, either signing up and being registered as a participant on that clinical trial. So that is incentivization as well to not only participate in, but sharing your medical health status as it complies with different clinical trials.
And was that compensation, was that handled through cryptocurrency? Was it handled on the network, or was that just typical compensation?
It was typical compensation, but it was more of a proof of study, proof of concepts to really test out how that compensation essentially down the line as it matures will happen. But that's something that can be generated directly through the app. For what we've used the compensation and crypto to date on, for our use cases on the consumer app is essentially, providing tokens for completing goals within app. So that's also part of, and there are a number of companies who do today, rewards for, behavior changes or actual care plan, positive behavior changes. And we see by taking it a step further, that's an automation that can happen directly on a blockchain enabled system.
Got it. If you were a few years ahead of your time with blockchain for health and on the front end of this, looking at this at the ecosystem now in 2020, kind of where you think we'll be in 4 or 5 years, if kind of all goes as planned and as hoped, and kind of regulations work in your favor, what kind of big doors do you see this opening up in the near term?
No, absolutely. I think 2020, where we are now, again, in being in that trough vision meant really starting to integrate and implement on the ground level. I would say adoption, in the next 5-8 years, on that hype cycle, if all goes well, we definitely see a transformation really in the healthcare industry and how patients interact overall in healthcare, right? And is even as we look as we go through those value-based model changes, and what the current pandemic has highlighted is, it's okay to provide care outside of the hospital setting, and in order to do that, we now have to empower people to be able to be comfortable with no health status and what their health would look like from an individual level. So I think that's powerful in itself to really, I wouldn't say flip the model upside down, but really, start to do what healthcare is intended to do, right? And it's to heal and make people healthy. So with the use of technologies and these digital tools, I would say we'll definitely start to see more of a marketplace model evolve within healthcare, where
What do you
again,
mean? What do you mean by that?
yeah, we're putting, the patients back at the center of the care. They have the autonomy to not only select, providers or carriers, right? More of that transparency, but a model that now they know within themselves, like they're the owners of their health. They can start to be part of that conversations, whether that's with their primary care physicians, which historically the doctor is the one who owns that medical record. You go in once a year, they tell you X, Y, and Z, but we can start to have more of that open dialogue.
Got it. Got it. And you feel like blockchain itself is integral to doing that securely and efficiently.
Yes, it's part of that equation.
Part of it. Awesome. Awesome. Well, Chrissa, I appreciate your time. Appreciate hearing sort of the update. Excited to see. I have listed on here that you received a grant from Novartis. You've had some great news recently, and so I applaud you for the news you've been making, and applaud you for just sticking to this. Like you said earlier, you were kind of one of the very first voices in blockchain for health, and you've had to show some persistence, I'm sure.
Oh yeah.
To push through, to keep convincing, to pivot when necessary, to evolve, and keep innovating. So thank you for doing that.